Deep beneath the cold, restless, and unforgiving waves of the North Atlantic Ocean, the grandest ship of her era, the Titanic, rests in silent isolation on the dark seabed. We know her precise coordinates, we have illuminated her ghostly corridors with deep-sea cameras, we have navigated her perimeter with advanced submersibles, and we have even guided wealthy tourists down to gaze upon her decaying grandeur. This reality naturally prompts a compelling question that has captivated minds for generations, which is why has no one simply brought this legendary vessel back to the surface? It appears to be the most logical and straightforward course of action because you have the most renowned maritime icon in human history resting on the ocean floor, and transforming her into a grand shoreside museum where millions would pay admission to walk her decks would undoubtedly generate an absolute fortune. Over the past century, a diverse array of visionary engineers, ambitious billionaires, and determined salvage companies have proposed dozens of elaborate strategies to resurrect the Titanic from her watery grave. Some of these concepts were highly creative, while others bordered on complete madness, yet every single attempt ultimately met with failure. The fundamental reasons for these repeated failures begin with the sheer hostility of the environment where the ship now resides, as the Titanic rests approximately 12,500 feet beneath the surface of the North Atlantic. This distance translates to roughly 2.5 miles straight down into the abyss, a depth so profound that if you were to stack the iconic Empire State Building on top of itself more than 8 times, that towering monument of human engineering still would not reach the wreck from the surface. At this immense depth, the water pressure is around 6,000 pounds per square inch, which is approximately 400 times greater than the standard atmospheric pressure you experience while standing peacefully on a beach right now. At such depths, human lungs would be instantly crushed, and the steel hull of a standard submarine would crumple like an empty soda can. In June 2023, the world saw exactly what this pressure can do when the Titan submersible, carrying 5 adventurous souls down to visit the Titanic, suffered a catastrophic implosion. The carbon fiber hull collapsed in a fraction of a second, ending the lives of everyone on board with a force so extreme that the entire vessel was reduced to fragments scattered across the ocean floor. That is what 6,000 pounds per square inch of pressure does to a deep-sea submersible. So imagine trying to attach cables, rig lifting equipment, and raise an entire ship under those exact conditions, in complete darkness, in near-freezing water, miles below the nearest breath of air. Even if you solve the pressure problem and operate on the ocean floor, you still face another massive obstacle, and that is the weight of the vessel. The Titanic displaces over 52,000 tons, an almost unfathomable weight equivalent to roughly 36,000 cars. No crane on Earth can lift that, and no cable system ever built could handle that load from such a depth because the required tensile strength does not exist in any material we currently manufacture. Even if you could somehow generate enough upward force, the ship itself would fall apart the moment you tried to lift it. This is because the Titanic is not sitting down there in one piece. She broke in half as she sank, leaving the bow and the stern separated by about 2,000 feet of desolate, open ocean floor. While the bow section looks surprisingly intact in photographs, the stern is barely recognizable, remaining a twisted, compressed pile of mangled steel that does not even look like part of a ship anymore. Even the bow, which appears solid from the outside, is incredibly fragile, its steel weakened by over a century of corrosion. Entire sections of railing have already collapsed, and the decks are buckling inward. If you attached cables to the hull and started pulling, the ship would not rise but would instead disintegrate, making it impossible to lift as a single piece. Despite these realities, people have proposed some truly wild ideas over the decades. One famous plan suggested filling the wreck with millions of tiny, air-filled ping-pong balls to create enough natural buoyancy to float the ship to the surface. It is a clever idea on paper, but at 6,000 pounds per square inch, every single ping-pong ball would be crushed, flat the instant it reached the wreck, rendering them completely useless. Another plan proposed injecting the hull with petroleum jelly to displace the water and create buoyancy, while someone else suggested encasing the entire ship in a giant block of ice to float it to the surface. Engineers at the BOC Group calculated that this would require pumping 500,000 tons of liquid nitrogen down to the seafloor, which is, to put it mildly, not practical. Then there was the dramatic idea from Clive Cussler's 1976 novel titled Raise the Titanic, where the hero patches the holes in the hull, fills the ship with compressed air, and the vessel rockets to the surface like a submarine. It was a great scene for a movie poster, but it was written when people still believed the Titanic sank in one piece. And even if she had, compressed air at that depth would require pressures no hull could contain. None of these ideas would work, not even close. However, someone did manage to bring a substantial piece of the Titanic to the surface, and the story of how it happened is almost as dramatic as the sinking itself. In 1994, a company called RMS Titanic Inc. spotted a massive section of the ship's outer hull lying in the debris field, a piece of the starboard side roughly the size of a standard city bus with 4 portholes still intact, 3 of which still had glass in them. They called it the big piece and decided to bring it home. The first attempt in 1996 involved attaching diesel-filled flotation bags to the section, inflating them, and slowly floating the 15-ton fragment to the surface. They had 3 expedition ships on site, while 2 full-size cruise ships circled nearby, packed with paying spectators, Titanic survivors, and celebrities. Thousands of people stood at the rails as the flotation bags were released, and the big piece began its 2-hour ascent. The bags broke the surface. The crowd cheered, and then a hurricane arrived, tearing through the recovery site with violent winds and towering waves. The lines holding the big piece snapped, and the 15-ton section of hull plummeted back to the ocean floor, forcing them to abandon the mission. 2 years later, in 1998, they went back with better equipment, and this time, when the piece broke the surface, it stayed. It was carefully pulled onto a recovery vessel and is now on permanent display at the Titanic exhibition in Las Vegas, where over 22 million people from all corners of the globe have come to see it. The reality of that achievement is that recovering one single piece took 4 years, 2 full expeditions, millions of dollars, and incredible luck, yet it weighed only 15 tons compared to the 52,000 tons of the full ship. Over the decades, salvage teams have recovered more than 5,500 artifacts from the wreck, including plates, jewelry, coins, a violin, and even the ship's engine telegraphs. Each recovery required specialized submersibles costing tens of thousands of dollars per dive, and every single one of those objects came from the debris fields scattered between the 2 halves of the ship, not from inside the hull itself. While humans argue about what to save, nature is quietly eating the Titanic alive. If you have ever seen footage of the wreck, you have probably noticed the strange, reddish-brown formations hanging from the hull like ghostly icicles made of rust. Scientists call them rusticles, which are created by colonies of bacteria that feed on iron, consuming the steel and leaving behind fragile, hollow tubes that crumble to dust when touched. In 2010, researchers from Dalhousie University in Canada discovered a unique species of bacteria living inside those rusticles that had never been found anywhere else on Earth, naming it Halomonas titanicae. This salt-loving organism is specifically adapted to consume the ship's steel, creating tiny mounds of corrosion that eat deeper and deeper into the hull plates. Scientists estimate that the Titanic is losing hundreds of pounds of iron every single day, causing the hull to grow thinner, the support beams to weaken, and sections of the deck to collapse into the interior. Features clearly visible in photographs from the 1980s are now buried under rubble. And at the current rate of decay, some researchers believe the Titanic could be completely gone within 20 to 30 years, while others give it a century, but the outcome is the same. The ship is disappearing, and there is nothing anyone can do to stop it. Honestly, a lot of people think that is exactly how it should be. Because beyond the engineering impossibilities and the biological decay, there is another reason the Titanic has never been raised, one that has nothing to do with technology, bacteria, or money. It is a grave site. More than 1,500 people died when the Titanic sank on April 15, 1912, and most of them went down with the ship. Their bodies never recovered. When Robert Ballard first found the wreck in 1985, his initial reaction was not celebration. After a few moments of excitement, the reality hit him, and he and his crew held a moment of silence on the deck of their research vessel, standing over the graves of 1,500 people in the darkness below. What Ballard saw on the ocean floor made the weight of that even heavier. The bodies themselves are gone, consumed entirely by the cold water and marine organisms over a century in the deep ocean, but their shoes remain. Leather contains chemicals that sea creatures avoid, so scattered across the debris field, exactly where passengers fell, are pairs of shoes sitting undisturbed on the sediment, such as a mother's leather shoes next to her daughter's, which is all that is left. Since the discovery, multiple governments have moved to protect the site. In 2012, exactly 1 century after the sinking, the United Nations officially declared the wreck a protected site, as anything underwater for over 100 years counts as cultural heritage. The United States and the United Kingdom ratified a separate treaty in 2019 that specifically and strictly regulates who can visit the wreck and what they can remove, giving both governments the power to grant or deny licenses for any activity within 1 kilometre of the site. The wreck is treated with the same respect as a cemetery because that is what it is. So the real answer to the question is layered. We have not raised the Titanic because we cannot, as the depth is too extreme, the pressure is too crushing, and the ship is too heavy, too fragile, and too far gone. But we also have not raised it because we should not. Somewhere in that wreck, tangled in the corroding steel and settling into the sediment, are the last traces of people who never made it home, including families who sold everything they owned for a ticket to America, and workers who saved for months to afford a third-class fare. Among them was a Mexican lawyer named Manuel Urichurtu, who sent his beloved mother a postcard of the ship the day he boarded, promising to visit her when he got home, but she never saw him again. The ocean is taking the Titanic back, piece by piece, day by day. The bacteria will keep eating, the steel will keep thinning, the decks will keep collapsing, and in a few decades, there may be nothing left at all, just a faint impression on the seafloor where a ship once rested. For the 1,500 people who went down with it, maybe that is the most fitting end there is, not a museum, not an attraction, just the quiet deep in time doing what time does.